very proud to introduce our guest presenter tonight, Steve Chapman. Grew up in England, where he took up hiking and climbing throughout Europe. He moved to Coquitlam with his wife Jackie in 2001, and shortly after joined BMN. The same year, Steve and Jackie came on their first BMN hike to the Celestia Memorial. I don't even know if Steve remembers that. He does, okay, good. And that Celestia Memorial is in the Chilliwack area. In 2008, Steve started making maps professionally and has worked on projects across the country. He joined Coquitlam Search and Rescue in 2013 and not only used his skills of hiking to help people, but he realized a good map of the Tri-Cities was needed, and he used that as a fundraiser for Coquitlam Search and Rescue. He is now on his third edition of the Tri-Cities Hiking and Biking Topographical Trail Map, and I can't count how many times I've been on the trail and people tell me how much they love the map. The other thing they always ask is, where can I get one? So I keep on funneling them towards Steve. I don't know if everybody comes, but yeah, he has them for sale tonight. He also has a map which is similar to the Tri-Cities map, but it's of Golden Ears and Maple Ridge. Steve also, if you've seen this book before, 105 Hikes. It was the continuation of the 103 Hikes book. Steve did the maps for this book, as well as I believe about 12 other books that he had his hand on and making the maps for as well. Yeah, and Steve's maps aren't always about outdoor activities. I remember him producing a map about Lower Mainland craft breweries. So I'm not a beer drinker and didn't find that one that useful. So Steve also works for the city of Coquitlam, like myself, leading hikes and sharing his knowledge about hiking safety. He runs programs on backcountry navigation, where people can learn how to use a map, compass, and other navigational devices like GPSs and smartphone apps, so they can be safely navigate our local wilderness areas. As a Coquitlam SAR volunteer, Steve teaches outdoor activity to adults and children through the Hug a Tree program. He's also a member of the Pinecombe Burke Stewards, working on trails to make them safer for fellow hikers. Steve enjoys hiking, climbing, running, kayaking, cycling, skiing, and probably other things. I've been on many trips with Steve, and we always have a good time enjoying the outdoors and finding something to laugh about. We both have a long list of places we want to go, and quite often we discuss the challenges and logistics of getting to these places. I really look forward to hearing how maps are created. This is going to be great. And I now welcome, not to the stage, but standing somewhere about, talking about this, a fellow BMN member and friend, Steve Chapman.
Great, you can hear me now. Good evening, everyone. Thanks for the introduction, Ian. You said so much about me, I don't really have much to say left. But it was all true, for the most part, a bit of exaggeration. So I'm going to split the talk tonight into two different sections. So the first section is actually a personal story of how I got into map making, because unlike a lot of people who do that kind of thing, they go to GIS school, university, I had none of that. I actually started off in electronics design, so I graduated from the University of York back in 1988, long time ago, and I spent many years in that corporate world. So I was designing telecommunication circuits, testing. That job actually brought me to Canada in the first place, which it was a great opportunity to come in. And this would be the kind of thing I'd be working on, so designing circuit boards, schematics, laying PCBs out, all of that kind of thing, testing. It was a really interesting job, and I actually really did enjoy that. But it's a volatile world, it's the corporate world, it's hire and fire, and there wasn't really any job security. So my journey into map making started one morning, when was it? In 2007. So I was working in North Vancouver, and because of the traffic, I always used to go in early, and because of that, then I used to be the first in the office to put the alarm code in. So there I go, I put the alarm code in, and something's a bit off today, because it's not saying you can come in, it's going beep. Okay, no worries, I'll go in anyway. But what I didn't know was that the management there were plotting to fire me. So that alarm actually alerted a couple of senior people there, and 20 minutes later they arrived like the cavalry, marched me into a room, handed me a piece of paper, and basically said, okay, pack your stuff, get out. Pretty dramatic exit from that world, and it was pretty upsetting. I got in the car, I was in tears, didn't know what to do. But the atmosphere in that place wasn't good anyway, so okay, this is time to think of a new start. What am I going to do for the rest? What's going to be career part 2? So what did I do? The first thing I did was turn to the outdoors. So I packed my backpack, did the West Coast Trail, had to think about it, went on one of these career planning programs, and it sort of focused me into, okay, I've got these technical skills, I've got these outdoor skills, how can I combine those different aspects? Laying out a printed circuit board is actually very similar to designing a map, similar kind of precision activities. So I was being steered in that direction. So to cut a long story short, I actually got onto a program run by Douglas College, and it's a very good program. So if any of you guys out there are thinking of changing careers and want to go self-employed, then their self-employment program is really good. So I ended up here, and it was a year's program pretty much, and they teach you all the intricacies of setting up a business. You just got to have an idea. So what's my idea? Okay, it's going to be a digital guidebook. Something I'd thought of on the West Coast Trail. There's a really good guidebook where it describes blisters and bliss. Probably some people are familiar with that. So it describes the route north to south and south to north, and I thought, hang on a minute, I can do that in a multi-dimensional way. I can have a network of trails and get this software which I haven't developed yet to say, I want to go here, 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 and I'll get a guidebook for that route. So that was the idea. They said, yeah, that sounds interesting. Go away, develop it, sell a few, and then you're in the program. And that was where my first company, Virtual Outdoor Adventures, was born. So that little DVD thing there was our first product. It was pretty basic. Had quite a few little quirks that needed ironing out, but it wasn't bad. And in that product was where I designed my first map. So got the software, figured it out. The map is in there. It was actually of a section of the Kettle Valley Railway. So we had this, and the program was going good. I knew how to do the accounting. And then, we had cable TV, I think, at the time, and used to watch Dragon's Den. And then thought, oh, they're coming into town, you know, let's just go to the audition just for fun, right? Let's see what it's all about. Had no intention of getting on the show. I took Jackie with me, which was probably the reason why we ended up on there, because we got there, put the computer screen up in front of them, and then we're all quirky and probably British craziness at its best, right? And that's what they like. It's entertainment. It's not about the business. It's about entertainment. Went home, didn't think anything of it, then got a call off the directors and, oh, you're coming to Toronto. Okay, we're not ready for this. We haven't got a single sale. We've only got a prototype product, but yeah, we'll do it, right? It's an experience. And it was an experience. It was a crazy experience. We got there, we weren't prepared. We didn't realize there's a time difference between here and Toronto. So we were brain dead when we got there, and we were even more brain dead when we actually got in front of the dragons. So you can just see there the head of Arlene Dickinson and Kevin O'Leary there, the big bad guys from the past. They destroyed us, you know. They didn't even want to know what the product was at the end of the day. But it was fun, and we thought if we got on TV, then, you know, that's all right. And the clincher was that as we were walking off, you know, our heads were down, Jackie goes, always look on the bright side of life, singing as she's going out. Okay, that guaranteed us a slot on the TV show. So that was sort of our start. And from then, so we had that first prototype, had to take it seriously now, so I had a plan of creating more maps. So with the help of people who collected data for me, then we created 4 additional. So one was a cycling guide of the Lower Mainland, the other was Stanley Park, touristy thing. Indian Arm Explorer, which is actually the precursor to the Tri-Cities map. So that has the local trails here, but also trails on the other side around Seymour and the North Shore. And then Kamloops Explorer, which has a whole bunch of trails in the Kamloops area, which I got another person to help me with that, collect the data. And we stuck at this for a few years, trying to sell these into shops and different places. And everyone who bought them really liked them. They were pretty well designed products, but people didn't really understand what they had to do with them. It wasn't like a book. They had to open a box. They took a map, so the maps, there was paper maps inside, but then they had to put software into their computer and then work that to get their routes. Hard to explain that when it was actually on a shop shelf. So they did okay, but not really good enough. I wasn't in the Dragon's Den, and Jackie reminds me this all the time. I said, like, in 5 years' time, we're going to earn $6 million. Didn't happen. Take quite a few zeros off that. But all the time, I was refining my map-making skills, so it wasn't a bad thing. And at the end of the day, I think the first iPhone came out in 2008, that time frame, and that would have been the death of the product anyway, because our 3D panoramas and photographs in there would have all been superseded by today's Google Street View. It's a similar kind of thing. I invented Street View before Google did, but they made all the money out of it. So we plugged away at that, and then, what year was it? It was 2012, we dissolved that, and then 2013, I thought, okay, I've got these new skills as a cartographer. Let's just try and make a living out of that. See if people want maps. So I created Canadian Map Makers, and that was the real start of the map making adventure. So that more or less occurred at the same time that I joined Coquitlam Search and Rescue. So there's a few earlier photos of me. I now look after the community education there. But it's been a lot of fun. I've been in the team now 11 years. I think that they might have heard a rumour that I was involved in map making, which is a useful thing to have in a search and rescue team. So not long after I joined the team, people began tapping me on the shoulder and say, our team map, it could really do with a bit of a revamp. And this here is our old team map. So it's not bad. It's actually similar to the Indian Explorer map. So we have Indian Arm in the middle, and then there's a whole bunch of trails which have numbers, but it hadn't actually been updated in a long, long time. So a lot of the trails on there were missing. And we needed to just totally start it again. We did a few tweaks and that with the existing one. It was actually designed in a drawing program called AutoCAD, so it wasn't even mapping software. So we had discussions, well, what are we going to do to get a new team map? Because developing a map is an expensive process. So in the end, I suggested, well, there isn't actually any decent hiking map at all of the Tri-Cities area. So why don't I spend the time collecting the data, putting that together, and then when it's all finished, then that map that we create can be T-map, but it can also be the map that the public are using. So the team uses the same map that the public are. So that was the idea. And that was not long after I joined the team, but there's a lot of trails out there, and most of them, well, a large number hadn't been mapped, properly GPSed. So it was a big task putting all that together. So the adventure began then. So what I did was systematically GPS all of the trails. So on the map cover it says that there's over 500 kilometers of trails on the map. So a lot of terrain. Luckily at the time I was a little bit fitter, so I was able to run a lot of those trails and get the GPS coordinates. So these here are a few photos of that exercise. And I was actually able to convince a few unsuspecting friends that they could come out and enjoy long 20, 30 days bushwhacking and getting lost. But it was a lot of fun. It was getting on for a couple of years of data collection. So I think most people would recognize those places there. So top left is White Rock, I think. Or is it? I don't know. And then, yeah, top middle is. But yeah, half the time we didn't know where we were. Half the time we're. But it's like putting a huge, when you don't have a map to work from, it's like putting a huge jigsaw puzzle together. So you get different data sources. So you'd get stuff off OpenStreetMap, you get it off Google Earth, you get it off, there's something called, who here is familiar with Strava? Yeah. So Strava, there's something called a heat map, so it records everybody's tracks, so you can actually see where people have been sneaking around. Okay, there might be a trail there because a few people have gone that way. So all of those data sources I'd use as a template to then build that puzzle up on the ground and get all the details and tracks for those. And then 2015, I think, finally, the map was completed. I had no idea whether anyone would be interested in buying it. But they were, so there's a big demand. So the Tri-Cities map is now in the 3rd edition. So the team were really pleased that we had a really good map of our area. We still use that now. And then, of course, Ridge Meadows Search and Rescue, which are our next door neighbours. Oh, we could do with a good map as well. There's nothing good for here. So then it was another 2 years of doing that whole data collection thing. And we had the Golden Ears map as well. So now I have the whole area covered from Indian Arm out to Stave Lake. So pretty pleased with the fact that now we have decent maps, hiking maps for this area. And then I guess the final part of the story is, as I was doing this, then word was getting around that, I'm not bad at doing this. Can you do maps for us? So it's gradually just ramped up since then. So we have just an example of a few of the projects that I've worked on. So guidebook authors come to me. They might want a map of the continent showing where different sites are. So the Berries book is like that. The Let's Go Biking books, they've been very popular, so that they're cycle routes of Lower Mainland, Okanagan, Vancouver Island. And then the 105 Hikes book, and some of the other ones there, so Destination Hikes, backpacking on Vancouver Island, they're all from Greystone, and they have a lot of maps. So, that the Tri-Cities was one map. You're talking books, which, like the 105 Hikes, has about 110 maps in. So there's a lot of work in there, and probably a significant improvement on what the 103 Hikes predecessor was. The backpacking on Vancouver Island book, that's just actually won the award for at the Banff Film Festival as best guidebook. I know I didn't write it, but it's nice to know that my maps are in that particular publication. There's other things up there. So the Path of the Paddle, that's an interesting thing. That's 1,100 kilometre paddling route in Manitoba to Ontario Lake Superior. If you're ever thinking about doing that, it's quite funny. So the director of that organisation, we completed the map and he did the route. And he was posting on Instagram pictures of the route and him as well. And he looked, quite okay at the beginning of it. Like 3 or 4 months later, dragging a canoe across portages, getting thunderstorms. He looked like he'd been dragged through the hedge backwards. He looked in rough shape, right? So I think it's a pretty tough route. But that map, they're really pleased with that because it documents the whole route from start to finish. Not only in that smaller scale version, but also a series of more detailed sections that you can break it down into. And then I guess probably the most fun one there is the beer map. So that was an interesting one. A guy approached me and says, "Oh, you know, I'm into craft beer. It's the next big thing." And he was right. You know, it's taken off. It was before it really took off. He says, "I want a map of all the breweries of the Lower Mainland," and that's what that turned out to be. Didn't make a lot of money because a lot of the payment was in vouchers for beer, which isn't a bad thing at all. Just going to grab some water. Thank you. Yeah, so that's how I became a cartographer. So it's been a fun journey. Certainly more interesting than the 9-to-5 life beforehand. So I just wanted to finish off by talking about what actually goes into designing a map. So this is where the technical part starts off. The process is pretty much the same for any client. So someone will find me on my website, they'll ring me up or send me an email, and then the consultation starts then. So the trouble is they'll have an idea in their head what they want, but they won't be able to put that down on paper or communicate it in another way. It's in their inner thoughts. So the process is about teasing that information out of them bit by bit. So it's an iterative process. It's almost like a form of art where you don't know what it's going to turn out like until you've experimented and finished with it. And that's what map making is like. It's not like everything is standard. Some people like these colours, other people like these colours. Some people like a clean look, other people like silly cartoons all over the map. It can be anything, right? So it's getting into the head of that customer as to what they want. So the next thing is the framing. So that's quite often out of all the activities is what area is this map going to cover? Because it's a bad scale. So they might want a really, really big area, but you're only putting it on a small piece of paper, so you can't get the detail you want. So you might then have to change the area of coverage. It might be that they want something that goes in a magazine like this, but the shape of the ground is like that. So you have to do certain tricks to get everything fitted into that particular area. So that's a tricky area. And then the next thing is the base layer. So the base is all the stuff that goes on the bottom of the map. What's the style? So there's so many different types of style. It could be like a hiking map that has contours on. It could be a tourist map that has streets and buildings and restaurants and things like that. So depending on what the map is going to be, it'll be very, very different bases there. It could be a satellite image, but that's what the canvas of the map starts out at. And then on top of that, the customer will have their own data typically to put on. So if it was a tourist map, where are all the shops and restaurants, or if it's an event map, where are all the tents and things to go on that. So they'll supply that information, and then that will go on top of the base layer, and that's how we start building things up. We determine the styling, colours. The colours can be a tricky thing. Some of my clients, they openly admit to being colorblind, but still insist on certain colors. So it's a tricky process. Things that I think look horrible, they'll say, yeah, that's amazing, and vice versa. So it's a tricky thing. But we come down to styling, and then we get to build the thing. So there's a program called QGIS. It's a free open source program. Any one of you, if you're interested in doing this, you can download it off the internet and play with it. It's a really cool program. And that's the basis of where I build all the information in and start gathering it and applying the styles. And then when all that's done, the final artwork is done in Adobe Illustrator. And then sometimes I'll use Photoshop to tweak things. So there might be a background in there. Say it was a satellite image and it's too dark. I can lighten it in there. I can actually use Photoshop and then determine, say, where the vegetation zones are, and then create vector images of that as well. So that comes into the process. And then finally, tidy everything up, edit it, and then we're always going through this loop with the customer. Sometimes that loop might be just 1 or 2 passes. Sometimes it might be 50 passes if they're fussy, so you never know. And then the final thing is, so like for things like the, if we just go back, so things like the path of the paddle, then it has to be designed for print as well. So there's a whole bunch of requirements to get something ready for print. So for example, if you have a map like this, then you can't just end the design at the edge of the paper. It's got to bleed over the edges, and you've got to work out where the folds are going to be, and there's a tolerance in those, and how the folding is going to take part on the paper in the machine, all that kind of thing. So that last bit can be a little bit complicated as well. And then finally it's published. And generally speaking, these types of maps are created in bigger quantities. It's cheaper, so you can't just have 100. You've got to go into the thousands or even higher quantities for it to be economical. So you better make sure that the design's right before you go to print, because it's not something you can then put right. The print is there, it's all set up on the presses, and if it's wrong, it's not a good thing to have wrong. You'll be living with those mistakes for a few years. So what goes into a map in terms of data? Well, we have on the top layer, we've covered this already, so the proprietary data, so points of interest, trail data, our BC parks and that will have their own databases, all these kind of things, so that will form the top layer of the map. Digital elevation, so that's interesting. So pretty much anywhere in the world you can get a model of the terrain, and every point is surveyed, and each one of those points has a height, and it comes as a DEM file, as I say, and that can be then used to do lots of different things. So it can be used to make the shading on a map to make it stand out, look like it's 3 dimensions. It can be used to, if you plug it into QGIS, you can create the contours from that, and you can create the contours at any interval. So that elevation data is pretty flexible in what you can do in terms of creativity. Satellite imagery, so some maps we just want to get a feeling for what's underneath terrain-wise. So you have a satellite image, it might not be full, contrast, but just so you can see where the trees and the rocks and the scree are, and you have a better idea of the terrain if it's a hiking map or something like that. The topographical data, that's again government data, so pretty much anywhere in the world there's databases of where the streams are, where the lakes are, where the vegetation zones are, so that's another layer we can use. Speciality data, so that'd be more for municipal type maps, so all our land boundaries are drawn out, accessible information from local authorities, so if someone's wanting a map of their property, we can get that data and work that out that way. I've already mentioned the Strava heat map, so great for if you're exploring an area, where does the trail go, where have people been, and then we can map that out on the ground to verify that where one man has been before, 2 or 3 can go after. So OpenStreet data is actually probably one of the most useful things. It was an initiative started quite a few years ago, and again it's open source, so when people go hiking or driving or exploring, they'll actually take their own GPS tracks and upload it to this central resource. It's like a Wikipedia for trails, so it all gets smoothed out. So a lot of the data you'll see online is derived from that OpenStreet data, and it's a really good starting point for knowing where trails are. But I would say it's probably 80-90% accurate. There's been a few search and rescue incidents where people have been using that data to go hiking, and what's happened is we've had mountaineers who've gone up a cliff face. Oh, that's a route, so I'll put that into OpenStreet data, and then the family casual hikers have come along after. Oh, there's a trail there, we'll go down that. And it's not a path, it's a climbing route, and with inevitable consequences. So you have to take this data with a bit of a pinch of salt. Natural Earth is another good one for making more larger scale maps. So smaller scale, so wider spanning maps of the world, of a continent. They take all that data, which locally is a massive amount, and then what they do is they simplify it so you can make maps of much bigger areas, and it just makes it a lot easier to use. So I'm doing a series of maps now, which are they're war maps. There's a whole bunch of communities out there that play war games, and that kind of data is ideal for that because you can map out a whole continent and shorelines without getting into the tiny, tiny detail that you'd otherwise have to do. And then Google Maps, good source of where businesses are. They want to advertise, so everything in a city will be in Google Maps at some level or another. And these are a few of the tools I use. I've mentioned them before. So QGIS is the open source. So if anyone's interested, you can just download it and play with that. Get some data online and start building your own maps if you like. Google Earth is an amazing resource for plotting points and getting it into the other programs. Global Mapper is an interesting one. I bought that when I first started. It's a really, really old program, but I bought it before they put the subscription in, so I can do lots of little tricks with that without actually having to pay anything for that. And then the last two at the bottom there, so Illustrator and Photoshop, those are the two programs which I use to pull it all together and get a refined map product. And some of those file sizes can be pretty big, so like the Tri-Cities map, I think, is about 1.5 gigs worth of data, just one map. So they're pretty big file sizes. You need a very good, powerful, fast computer to do this kind of thing. So that's how we make maps. How are we doing for time? Yeah, so. Oh. Yeah, so opening it up for questions now. So anything related to mapping or search and rescue. Yeah.
Appreciate that. I've never had a map like yours have the battery discharge, and it's amazing to me how few people appreciate how much work must have gone into it. I'm just wondering, I'm very curious about how you consolidate all the data points and pull them into the system. Like, there's a gap in the knowledge that I'm listening to you closely as to how you draw from points that are made on it by somebody getting the data and pull it in. And then on top of that, I would add to it with different forms of algorithms and artificial intelligence. Will that make it easier for you to consolidate the data?
I'm not sure whether AI would really help. It's almost an art form, I would say, mapping. So we have all the data sources that we can get from all these different places, and then we bring those in and bring styles according to what the customer wants, and then we build like a final artwork. You know, I could say to AI, because that's the thing that's coming through now, do me the Tri-Cities map and save me 2 years worth of time. I don't think anyone would be using that map. They'd be lost within minutes because there's a very much a human element into determining how it all goes together and looks. It's a fairly simple process in that we have this whole smorgasbord of data sources, and then we cook them in a different way to bring them together into a certain look and feel.
Are you doing it by intention? Like, for example, when Ian's gone hiking with some friends and you've marked points on the system, or as you track it, are you taking data points like that and confirming the trail, for example, to the summit of Elevate Mountain is that way? Like, is that from intention, or you? That's what I'm trying to, in my mind.
Oh, okay. So yeah, I guess you're alluding more to the getting the data for where the trails are. Yeah.
Consolidate the route is this way and not that.
Yeah. So it's a detective process. So firstly, there's established reference maps. I'll look at those. I'll take OpenStreetMap, which has a whole bunch of things that other people open source contributed to. There'll be Strava, which is a heat map, which is, okay, there might be some new things on there. And then maybe satellite imagery will reveal in areas where there's no trees, there could be trails which are unmapped as well. So I'd take all of those things together, and then I'll create a temporary map. And that temporary map will be geo-referenced, so I can then go out into the field and then sort of follow the lines and get the GPS tracks and then verify whether those trails are actually there or not. And then I might get to a point and it's a 5-way junction, and there's only 3 ways shown on any of that data I've collected before. And then in that case, what I would do is, okay, now I've got to go out, explore that way, backwards and forwards and so forth, and build that cobweb of trails up and get the GPS tracks. And then the other important thing with that is going over it several times so you get an average, because every time you go over with a pass, you have that inaccuracy with the GPS. So the more passes you have, the more accurate that is.
Next question.
We have one here.
Oh, hang on.
Oh, we've got to
Here,
do a
let's get
mic
the mic
thing.
here.
The accuracy of the GPS, one pass, you could be how far off? 20 meters off? More in the forest?
Yeah, it depends. So, I mean, it depends on the equipment. So, like a handheld GPS, I've never had one, but if you put an antenna on, you can improve the accuracy. But from experience in the forest, a handheld GPS would be plus or minus 20 meters, something like that. As soon as you go out into the open, so say you came out of the forest onto the dikes, then you're down to 2 or 3 meters. So the tree cover makes a big difference. And then in some places, you might not get a GPS signal at all. So there's dead spots around. So there's like, for example, dead spots near the bottom of Burt Mountain where the gun club is. Unless you've actually got lucky and got a fix on your 4 satellites that you need, you might not get a fix at all. And when you do, the accuracy is going to be quite a bit out in there. So it'll vary where you are. The more trees there are, the more rock walls and geographical features like that there are, then the less accurate it's going to be.
Oh, hang on. Let's get the mic here.
On Alouette Mountain, you go down, and it says on the GPS on your that it's a good trail. Well, it's not a good trail, and it's the same when I think it's a Roosevelt Lake at Medicata. It's easy lake to get to, but it's one hell of a lake to get back to the car if you go down the back side, especially.
Yeah, and the quality of the trails is something else which comes into play. So when I was creating these maps, I put a quality grade on the trails. So some are big, wide forest roads, others are like bridleways that they're easy to follow. And then you get down to what I call the backcountry trails, which is where you probably find Ian. He might be there with his machete on those things.
But you gotta find the blaze marks.
Yeah, there's and over time those trails tend to disappear. Nature is always fighting to claim those trails back. So, and the more remote they are, the more likely they are to present a challenge to navigation.
Well, it's getting back home. You know, you can go up at 5 o'clock in the morning and daylight saving time, but you want to be back at 10 o'clock the next day. And you better take a overnight kit with you.
Yeah, I mean, just putting my other hat on with search and rescue, I mean, the general rule is always go out with enough stuff on your back that you can spend a night out.
Yeah.
Because if you hike enough, then it's almost a dead certainty you're going to spend an unexpected night out. It will happen. So, make sure you got enough stuff to keep you warm.
A turnaround point.
Turnaround
yeah.
point, yeah.
Mark?
Yes, Steve. So it sounds like with the Tri-City map, you did a lot of the field work, or friends did a lot of field work to produce data. What about for the other maps? Did you rely simply on online data, or did you have people in the field as well?
So for the Golden Ears map as well, exactly the same as Tri-Cities, I was out there. For the other maps, then the data, so for the books, for example, the data for those came from the authors. So they went out and they got the GPS data and they annotated, they came across points, whether it's campgrounds or hazards, and they GPS marked those points. For the path of the paddle, that was all people who as a collective group, got together in sections, and they went out and GPSed the best routes, marked where the rapids are. It's something we don't have in this area, like big, long canoe routes, but you want to know where the rapids are, and you want to know where to get out and walk the boat, because you don't want to be that person who goes over the waterfall in your canoe. So for the outdoor maps, in short, the data comes from people on the ground. For the city touristy things, then it's mostly collected from what's already online.
Hey, Dave?
It's coming.
So, Steve, it sounds like a lot of your information is boots on the ground. Do you get any assistance through aerial photography at all, and especially with drone technology the way it is are you using any of that, or are you getting that information from especially search and rescue, who have the helicopter up and everything like that?
Yeah, so, I mean, that's an interesting question, the quality of the data. So a drone actually wouldn't help a lot around here anyway, because when you're above the tree canopy, you cannot see anything for the most part that's on the ground, even less so in a helicopter. So that's, like, if you go to the UK or something like that, where most of the ground is open, then your satellite's going to reveal every little detail. But here, you got these pesky trees that get in the way, and you got to get on the ground and get that data. So one thing you can actually do is something called LiDAR. So the principle of that is you have an aircraft up there. It can be a drone or it could be a helicopter, and it shoots laser down, and it does this spectral analysis, so it gets reflections back from different levels, so different levels of the vegetation, and then it'll actually, in places, reach right down to the ground. It looks for the reflection back, and the time for the reflection, it knows what that elevation delta is, and you can actually build a very accurate map of the forest floor using that technology. So, you know, even if there was, like on Burke, for example, there's lots of old forest roads there, and if you were walking them, you would probably see there's a bit of a bank here and a bank there, you know, all grown over trees. The LiDAR would actually pick that up, so you could see where the ancient or the older roads were. But that kind of technology is really expensive. You know, it's hundreds of thousands, millions just to do a survey. So,
I was just thinking, because of course you're all of a sudden you have a GPS dead spot.
yeah.
And that's like, well, I've got a drone here. I can, let's see if it'll help me in this dead spot and help me map things out, despite the fact there's trees there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's and flying a drone in trees, you're going to lose your drone sooner or later. It's I was shooting a video once, and it was with a friend's drone, and which sort of makes it worse, because I don't like friends' equipment to get trashed. And the gist of the video is someone has not made a trip plan. They climb up a rock face, they fall, and they're in the middle of nowhere. And then we got the drone to come up from where the victim was, not a real victim. And then it goes up, and then it goes above the tree canopy, and you just realize that that person there they've totally had it, because how is anyone going to find them in this sea of trees? That was the gist of the video. But the interesting thing wasn't a perfect GPS signal, so it wasn't getting that precise fix. So as it went up fine, but as it was coming down, it had a few meters delta from true, and it was going into the trees. And it thinks it's coming straight down, but because there's that interference, it's not perfect signal, then it's only got to hit a branch. Those propellers straight down, okay, $500 worth of junk.
Yep.
I can probably just shout it out. I'm just wondering how you charge for making your map. How do you come up with a cost estimate?
Yeah, so it's fairly simple. So I go through that whole consultation process initially. So I want to understand exactly what they want, because sometimes they think maybe it's a little bit simpler than what it is. So I'll try and tease out, well, are you going to then add this and add that? I'll work out in my head how many hours I think it's going to cost, and then I'll give them a number. They'll say yes or no, and then that'll be it. It's a fairly simple process.
Okay.
Yep.
Final question. Sorry.
Oh.
Hold on, Eileen. Let's have everybody hear you.
Yeah, I love your maps, especially the one of the Tri-Cities. I think it's great. I've spent hours going over it. You must have some projects in mind for the future. Can you let us in on what they might be?
So, yeah, the latest one, I mean, they're always coming in every, month or two, an interesting one. So the latest interesting one, which probably people here would be interested in, is a lady up in the Yukon. So for her 50th birthday, she wanted to paddleboard 50 lakes in the Yukon. So it looks pretty cool. So she's gone out, she's documented them, and I got the data of where all these places are, and I've never been to the Yukon, and now I want to go. And the problem with this job is now there's all these places I've never been to, but now because I've mapped them, I want to go there because there's some wonderful looking lakes up there, big mountains around, and I wouldn't be paddleboarding them. I'll be kayaking them.
Steve, maybe the question I have is on top of other people's minds. I've met people who are lost or disorientated on trails because they're following online apps like AllTrails and the accuracy of them. And I tend to avoid as much as I can, and I've compared them with the accuracy on the ground. As a search and rescue person, can you comment on the fact that, for example, on the AllTrails, it doesn't say, be aware that this trail may not be accurate. People assume it works correctly, and then, of course, it can go offline. Can you speak about that? Because maps, I think, we've got something tangible.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's... I guess the people who came up the AllTrails app don't want you to think about the perils of relying on that. They just want you to use the app. But there's a lot of things that can go wrong. So what happens with that? You've got your map, you've got your nice description. I'm following the dot on here. And I've had it happen to me. I've gone into a GPS dead spot. So now that dot isn't showing me where I am in relation to that map on the app. It's going, sorry. And then you've got nothing. And then the other thing is that phone is your critical failure point. So if something happens to that phone, the battery dies, then you're in trouble. The fact that you're using that app to navigate means that you're hammering the battery on that phone because you got the screen on more time than it should be. So if you had something happen to you, then what happens is, okay, 911, and then it's dead, right? So another bad thing. And the last bad thing, I already mentioned this, is that the maps on those apps are quite often generated from OpenStreet data, which, when I was doing my surveying, is probably 80–90% accurate. So if you're off the plot of what you're following, and trying to get back on track, you might not be following a map that is accurate. So there's a whole bunch of different things that can actually go wrong there, just relying on that.
Well, I know I did the snow caves this year in Golden Ears Park, and I tried those Gaia and all trails, and they stopped way before getting to the snow caves.
Mm.
And I've had some people that were on their way up there, and then they turned around and then we went up together and actually talked to them. But yeah, I'm concerned about that reliance on something, because a lot of people, they download the maps, which is one option, they pay for that, but they forget the idea that your phone can die, get wet, not work, and you're stuck.
Absolutely, yeah. There's lots of things that can go wrong, right? And yeah, it's a great example, right? The snow caves are quite a bit beyond where the trails are shown. So you have to have the sense, your mountain sense, which you can't get from an app. You get your mountain sense from being a person like Ian, who's done it since he was this tall, probably.
Yeah, I was just going to say the OpenStreetMaps, because I do presentations on hiking safety and where to hike and that. And OpenStreetMaps is fabulous, but a simple area like the Chines, that there's so many trails listed in the Chines, but they're different qualities. You know, some of them are fabulous and other ones are extremely overgrown. So it depends on what sort of trails you want to walk on. So, last question. Okay. Is that right? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, even that isn't fail-proof, right? Because if you have a phone, and I learned this the hard way, like you always learn things the hard way, right? So I had a phone which was, you know, it's on its last legs, right? So the battery's only lasting 4 or 5 hours rather than the 24 that it's meant to. When you got that, you're in dodgy territory, because it'll go from, yeah, I'm on 90, 80, 50, 40, 10, 5, and like it goes down like that. You plug your battery pack in then, when it's getting down to that bottom level, it won't save it if you're using it. It'll continue going down. So if your phone battery isn't healthy, you're draining more from it than you're able to put in from the charging battery back.
Well, thanks very much, Steve. Fabulous hearing about how you got into this. And hopefully some people will buy some of your maps tonight too. So at the break, make sure if you're interested in knowing about some more about the silent auction, you can see Kathy about the bake table, Edie about the whole sort of silent